so rather than put it off by another week, I figured I'd just get it over with so we can do a horror next week. I'm keeping the intro though, despite it not being thematically relevant to this week's topic. If you follow my channel, then you'll know I did a first impressions for A Juggler's Tale a couple of weeks ago. It was the story of a circus girl named Abby who runs away from the circus to seek freedom. Well, not was, still is. Things don't stop existing when I stop looking at them, no matter how much I'd like to think some of them do. That way, if I never laid eyes on HBO's The Prince ever again, that would mean it wasn't a thing anymore and the world would be better for it. So, as I said, in A Juggler's Tale, you play as Abby, a small circus juggler who has enough of sleeping in a cage every night and decides to jailbreak this bitch. With the help of a bear, she gets away and takes off into the wilderness to seek a life of her own. All the while, you'll hear the narrator telling you about what's going on, sometimes rhyming and sometimes not.
Once her acrobatics filled the villages with happiness. Since she's fled, she's known only duress. Haven't you learned your lesson? Knowing your place is a blessing.
At first the inconsistency just bothered me, but as we progress through the game and he loses more control of the narrative, he becomes more flustered and annoyed. It reminded me of the Stanley Parable to a degree, in that you repeatedly defy the narrator of your story, though this is a fairly lacking comparison the more I think about it, mostly because we're not deciding to do so in A Juggler's Tale, we're just doing the one thing the game says we can do, and that's to keep moving left until the game physically stops us. See, in this case we're not in control of the narrative, we're just participating in it. As the game says,
"Hey, it would suck if you did the thing that I don't want you to do," wink.
And then proceeds to have that as the only viable option to continue the game. And even if you fail, you don't face any consequences, save for a load time occasionally. You just pop back where you were, but I feel like we've jumped ahead a bit here, so normally I like to build to such talking points. The game is structured into several acts, with puzzles and challenges becoming more complex with each stage. That might sound obvious to you, but as plenty of games literally forget how to difficulty curve, I think it's worth mentioning when one does it right. But I don't think I should take such a negative tone. In fact, it's fairly strong in the gameplay department, with its own clever twists on a traditional side-scrolling platformer. See, the story is told with puppets. We control a puppet of Abby who is literally on strings, and we need to account for these strings as we proceed. You can't go under things, so you've got to find a way to clear the path. As big a hindrance as the strings are, they're also your lifeline. Up to a certain point, the narrator will use them to get us out of trouble and avoid certain hazards. It's a wee bit inconsistent, but in retrospect it kind of makes sense, because this narrator bloke is trying to rigidly tell a specific story. After a certain point we separate from these strings and take full control, losing the need to worry about getting under things, which is decent, although I don't know how the puppet moves in the context of the situation here. The narrator keeps going, making shit up as he goes along, quite obviously. Though given the framing device for the game is that it's being told as a story in a pub, I wonder how he's getting all these set pieces ready. What's weird is the game simultaneously becomes engaging and starts to lose me after Abby is freed from her strings. Engaging because the narrator's contempt and dissatisfaction with where the story is going becomes evident. We get the sense that he's a man who loathes this loss of control, and I was really enjoying how much he was losing his shit.
Was in ruins. Because the war endlessly ravaged and brutal. Yeah, the war ravaged the landscape because important people somewhere didn't get along.
But it loses me at the same time because of the practicality. Abby is a string puppet, she cannot move without them, so how is she moving and how does this fucker have the set pieces for his ad-libs? I know last week I said about not bringing up realism into video games, and it might now sound like I am backstepping a bit, but I swear I'm not. I'm just going by the rules that the game itself laid out from the opening act. It's one of those things that takes me out of the experience, you know, when the rules change to suit the game's plot. I sit here torn because I liked what the game was trying to do. At the same time, I don't like what the game was attempting to do because it was fundamentally flawed. Let's again bring up the Stanley Parable. Decent game, by the way, I should mention. Very good game. In that game, it's the choice of the player to define a narrative, which fundamentally changes how the narrator responds, and what sort of experience you ultimately get.
Oh no, not you again. Stanley, I'd also like to veto the line from having any role in our awesome new story.
Some paths you walk down, he becomes more accepting to a degree, but there's still this hint of cynicism, and sometimes he even plays along with you. Other times he's incredibly hostile and quick to anger. There's a couple of instances where he actually tries to kill the player. These two narrators I've been talking about, they share a common trait. They are both beings that indeed cannot stand a loss of control, because control is all they have and it's the very thing you attempt to rob from them. In A Juggler's Tale, you don't have this choice to take away their control, you're rigidly following a set narrative anyway. If the game had some balls, it would leave the choice open to us, but it clearly doesn't. It wanted to be a linear adventure at the same time, and I don't really think the style of gameplay was was clever for what it was, you know, for the story it was trying to tell. It's worth bringing up that I've got no issues with linearity. It can be used to maintain pace of a story, which isn't a bad thing, and I don't hate that A Juggler's Tale shoots for it. I just don't think it suits the way the game is telling its story. And that is a shame because there are bits I like about the game. I particularly love how much scorn the narrator has for the character of Abby. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I want to touch on it again. You can really hear the genuine hatred in his voice for this little girl in his story.
Nothing but corpses and spears. Burnt, broken, shabby. Nothing left alive. Except for the stupid brat Abby.
It makes me think that he may have even been the ringmaster who once held her captive, that his goal was to tell the story and have it end the way he wanted it to end. Only his story never ends the way he wants it to end, and it's a fact of the world that he cannot escape no matter how much he tries. That to me is the game's strongest point. It's just a shame that the very way in which the game presents its gameplay kind of robs it of any depth or real power. It was still an enjoyable enough experience, but I do feel like the game would have fared better if it gave us real options. There are some bits I need to complain about here on a mechanical level too, mostly the controls and the lack of responsiveness. Abby seems to sometimes grab or sometimes jump when you tell her to, which can be annoying, especially when running from these bandits you encountered, because even the slightest fuck up of your actions mean they're going to get you no matter how far you get. So if I made the slightest error because Abby wouldn't grab a ledge or just wouldn't jump when I told her to, I'd just stop and let him grab me, so that I could be sent back to the last checkpoint. There aren't many other areas where the game falls short, though it's worth mentioning it only had a few areas it could have fallen short to begin with, so its shortcomings are more glaring. Some of these bits are really trial and error. For example, there's this one bit later in the game where you need to get past a ship, but there's a whirlpool behind you so you can't really backtrack, though you are supposed to use it to kill this ship so you can go forward, and I just couldn't figure it out. I got the ship to fall in, but I could never manage to do so without killing myself as well. This is also the part of the review where I should mention that I didn't actually finish the game, at least not at the time of writing. Maybe by the time I've gone to record I would have changed that, and I might have to put an extra bit on the end. My overall thoughts are, whilst I like what the game was trying to do, I don't really like how it went about it. I've made that clear, I'm just repeating myself. Oh, and because I want to get this off my chest, Abby being a literal puppet is nowhere near as clever as you think it is, game. Yeah, I kind of wanted to open with that, but I then forgot to write it. So I'm now awkwardly crowbarring it in here. Not that it matters, most of you stopped watching ages ago. I could spend this time talking about how much I hate Paradise PD.
Who in the name of St. Mark Furman broke in and did all this?
That shit animated cop show on Netflix, despite it being made by comedians, it seems to lack any real jokes. Or I could chat about how much I love the amazing world of Gumball and how still to this day it provides me with delight because its jokes are actually jokes.
You stop freaking out about the gift. Like, a flower is fine.
How funny! That's exactly what I got you! Look!
And most of you would never know. I actually kind of do want to do all that stuff, but I will retain some level of professionalism. Okay, no I won't. God, the amazing world of Gumball is great and Paradise PD is shit.
Do you recommend me, Phantus?
Says the game. Oh, I don't know. I think I do? I think I do. Yeah, we'll go with that. I didn't have an awful time, I need to make that clear. I had a pretty decent time with the game. There are some control issues here and there, and the game's whole narrator versus protagonist bit would have worked better in a non-linear game, but otherwise it's pretty alright. I do prefer to play these sort of games, after all, made by artists with a vision in mind. Even if the vision was, hey, let's make an indie game, and that's most of the design document right there. I mean, Abby is a small child lost in a cruel, unfeeling world, which is 80% of the indie games. At least it used to be. Now it's mostly asset flips. Not that I'm against a traditional indie game of small child lost in big world. I find it to be some comfort in the familiarity it brings, even if it is a bit less inspired. So, A Juggler's Tale is pretty alright. Has some issues here, some strengths there, and whilst I'm not left in a bad mood, I probably won't ever consider it again. It can now join the over 400 other games in my collective library in the never playing again category, but at least it can hold its head up high, as it's in the small subcategory of not fucking awful. Honestly, these days it's easier for me to just brand all the games that aren't complete horseshit. Thanks for watching, be sure to check out the other content available on the channel, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. You can also support the channel on Patreon from as little as £1 a month. Check out the link in the description. Thanks in advance and we'll see you next time.